My name is Jen. I'm in my 40s and my friend and I run a business via Airbnb here in the UK. We own a few different properties across London, and while my friend acts as the financial backing, I do the day-to-day business of dealing with repairs and guest inquiries, as well as inspecting the rentals both before the guests arrive and after they check out. As you can imagine, summertime is our busiest period of the year, with business also picking up a lot around Christmas too. We always have this really quiet period around autumn time where we struggle to break even. It really puts a dent in the annual profits. Imagine our joy when last year we got a 3-week-long booking for one of our swankier properties in North London. It was a huge payday for us, even with the block discount that Airbnb mandates, and we try to be as welcoming and accommodating as possible to increase the chance of repeat stays. For those of you that have used Airbnb before, you know that the vast majority of rentals are completely no contact. That style has really only increased over the course of the pandemic. That means that we didn't meet our renters even once, and throughout the whole 3-week stay, we didn't receive a single call or contact attempt from them either. The only thing we knew for sure was that one of the 2 guests was a girl named Alice. Alice had paid the deposit, the rental fee, everything. About halfway through their stay, I dropped a text to Alice to ask if everything was going okay. I received no reply other than, "Fine, thanks." We assumed their stay was going wonderfully. I certainly wasn't complaining very much. Low-maintenance guests were a help, because as much as I don't mind helping out where and when I'm needed, there's nothing worse than a person who calls you up every 5 minutes asking where things are and claiming things are broken when they just don't know how to use them. When their 3 weeks were over, I made my way over to the flat to make sure everything was still in order. Not that I was expecting anything to be in rough shape though. Maybe a few towels left on the floor, a full bin bag or something. The usual minor stuff people leave behind when they're in a hurry to get out of there. We'd had someone make a real mess of one of the flats recently though after having an all-night party, so I was ready to be greeted by an absolute horror show. Nothing could have prepared me for what I found that day though. I knew something was wrong almost immediately after trying to get inside to check. There seemed to be something blocking the door from the other side. It took a few good hard shoves to get it to move. Then I saw further inside someone had piled up chairs against some of the doors as a means of slowing down entry as well, but not completely barring access. I also noticed how cold it was inside. That was the first hint that I got that someone had left all the windows open, something we specifically asked guests not to do, since the area had something of a pigeon problem. I rather quickly deduced that whoever had tried to bar the door had done so, then used a window to actually leave the flat. Why in God's name they'd want to do that though was a complete mystery to me, at least for the next few minutes anyway. I walked into the living room to shut the window. That's when I saw the mess they'd made. But unlike the mess that partiers leave behind, which tends to be loads of empty bottles and cans, cigarette butts, that sort of thing, this time it looked like there had been some sort of fight. Loads of glasses and plates were smashed, the chairs were wrecked, the tables were overturned. It was a complete mess. The next place I decided to check was the bedroom, deciding to leave the bathroom until last. I was honestly dreading whatever had been left in there. Seeing the state the bedroom had been left in just made me dread it even more. There were all kinds of empty condom wrappers all over the bedroom, as well as adult toys strewn everywhere. The sheets had stains on them. God knows what they'd come from. The whole room just reeked of you-know-what. It was disgusting. Finally, though, I braced myself to check the bathroom and see what kind of mess had been left behind in there. I was expecting something god-awful that I'd probably have to spend the rest of the morning cleaning. But like I said, I could have never been ready for what was behind that door. I pushed open the door slightly, took a peek inside, then immediately slammed it closed, after seeing something lying motionless in the bath. Something person-shaped. I say person-shaped because just from the split second I'd seen that, it didn't look like a person, not a living one anyway. They were lumpy and covered in gore, almost like they'd been butchered and the meat piled on top of each other. I think I was in denial about what I was seeing at first. I mean, I didn't want it to be what it was, so in those few moments, I tried to think of everything it could have been instead of facing reality. I don't know what actually drove me to open the door again. I certainly didn't want to. I think I'd actually managed to convince myself it was a hallucination or something. I just assumed the worst after seeing the rest of the place. It surely couldn't be as bad as I thought it was. Only, it was as bad as I thought it was. If anything, it was worse. There was a body lying there in the bath, probably in the worst condition you can imagine. Part of the reason I refused to recognize it immediately is because this girl's face was so beaten that you couldn't even recognize her as a human being anymore. There wasn't a single patch of skin that didn't have blood drying on it, but it wasn't that brown, old-looking blood that had long since clotted. It looked kind of fresh, like they'd been there for only a few hours at most. I immediately pulled my phone out, dialing 999 to tell them I needed police as quickly as possible. The girl, who I assume was the girl who'd rented from us, was laying there perfectly still. I couldn't hear her breathing or anything. I just assumed she was dead. I even told the bloke on the other end of the line that I was almost certain. And that's when he asked me to check her pulse to make sure. I did as he asked, 100% certain there would not be a thing. In my mind, there was no one on Earth that could survive the kind of violence I was seeing right here. I don't even think I was touching the right spot on her neck at first. I couldn't feel a single thing. After racking my brain for a minute trying to remember the girl's name, I think I just blanked because of the panic. I just said out loud, "Alice?" She then opened her eyes. It was almost like she'd properly come back from the dead or something. That was the single most terrifying moment of my life. It was horrendous. Her eyes were all bloodshot. One of them had no white in it whatsoever. It was just a bright red mess of broken blood vessels. As soon as she laid eyes on me, she started screaming and lashing out. I ran out of the flat and into the corridor outside, shouting, "She's still alive!" down the phone. After that, I had to run back upstairs to make sure the girl didn't leave by herself. She had obviously launched into fight-or-flight mode after waking up and must have thought she was still in danger. When I got back upstairs, she was half naked, slouched in the hallway, crying her eyes out. I told her to stay put, and an ambulance was on the way. All she could do was cry, while blood poured down her face. That's another image I'll never get out of my head, how her tears actually seemed to be just blood. When the paramedics arrived, I found out the only reason she hadn't run off after waking up screaming was because she literally couldn't. I don't know what kind of damage had been done to her legs, but the paramedics had to bring in a stretcher just to get her down into the ambulance. After she was taken to the hospital, a second set of policemen asked me to stay out of the flat on behalf of a forensics team, which were on their way down then. They proceeded to ask me questions regarding exactly what I'd seen and what I knew about the people renting. Obviously, I knew next to nothing other than the person's name and the amount of time they were staying for. Still, I answered the questions best I could. They promised to keep me in the loop regarding certain details so I could pass them on to our insurance company for the eventual claim we were going to file. About a week or so later, I got a call from an officer. While he didn't tell me exactly what happened, he told me everything he was permitted to. Basically, the two girls who'd rented the flat were call girls. They would often come down from the north to use the place as a kind of base of operations because they could charge more for their services in London than they could up north. At least, that was their logic for this little venture. Apparently, their idea had worked out really well, and they'd had a profitable, relatively trouble-free first few weeks. Then, though, on the night before they'd been due to check out, some local gangsters got wind of their little operation and didn't take too kindly. Apparently, they were charging quite a bit of money, but but still lower than the gangsters had agreed upon for all their girls. The gangsters hatched a little plan. They would raid the flat the girls were staying in, scare them enough to leave the area, and take any money they'd made in the process. Thing was, the girls didn't keep the money in the flat with them. They were taking the cash to a friend of theirs who just so happened to live in London too. That's how only one girl ended up getting left behind. She ended up being the only one they beat the crap out of and tortured as a means of scaring the other girl. They'd forced her out the window before making her lead them to where they'd stashed their money. That's all I was told, and as much as the officer hinted that they got a few blokes in custody, they obviously couldn't tell me who they were or who they were affiliated with. That was the single worst incident in the history of our little Airbnb business, and probably one of the worst things I'd ever come across in my entire life. Okay, so a few years back, me and my girlfriend decided to get out of the city for a few days by renting an Airbnb. We spent a while looking at a bunch of different places and finally settled in this place on a farm, about a 2-hour drive out of the city. It was this little guest house on a farm just across from the main house, where the owners must have lived. We talked a little via email after actually paying for the place. Just little things like if we wanted some wine or coffee left for our arrival. The owners were very friendly like that. Just a few days before we were due to drive out there though, they suddenly stopped replying to all our emails. It was a little worrying, but not hugely so. I mean, we'd already paid all our fees and stuff, so we were definitely entitled to rent the little guest house for the week we'd paid for. Besides, we figured they were just busy or something and would get back to us as soon as they could. They told us in one email that the keys to the place would be in a lockbox that was attached to the place's porch. They'd email us the code on either the day before we arrived or the day of our arrival for security reasons. Like I'd said though, they seemed to just totally go dark just a few days before, and they ended up not emailing us any kind of code. We were kind of annoyed, as anyone might be, as we'd already paid all the money and all that. I know we probably should have just canceled the trip and got a refund from Airbnb, but we really liked the idea of staying on this small farm. It would make the perfect little break from our busy urban lives, so we decided to just roll the dice. Drive out there and get the code to the lockbox by knocking at the actual farmhouse, instead of relying on email and stuff. The place was relatively easy to find, and both the farmhouse and the little guest house looked awesome. There was just one problem though. The door to the main house was wide open. There was a trail of clothes and household items, all leading up to a spot that it looked like a truck or car had once sat. As you can guess, we could instantly tell something was not right. It looked like whoever had lived there had left in a hurry for some reason. Just to be sure, we walked up to the door and knocked on it. Even though it was already open, we called out and tried to get anyone's attention. We didn't receive a reply, so there was definitely no one home. We didn't actually have any of their numbers. There was no getting in touch with them to find out what happened or when they'd be back. Not that we actually thought they'd be coming back anytime soon. Actually, the trail of stuff gave us a pretty good idea that no one would be returning at all. The real questions we were faced with was why the hell did the family leave in such a hurry? What scared them so bad they'd left so fast? We didn't exactly stick around for very long. You could just feel the bad vibes hanging in the air, and my girlfriend was begging me to get us out of there almost from the moment we'd left the car. And the time we were there, we didn't see any blood or anything like that. Nothing to indicate what had happened at all. We made sure to call the cops on the way back into the city, just to let them know something was up here, if they didn't already know. Getting our money back was much easier than we figured too. I guess they couldn't get in touch with the family either. Since it was still the day we were due to check in, I guess the money was still in digital limbo or something, so they got us a refund pretty quickly. I always wondered what happened. since we didn't end up getting any real answers about it, other than the fact we got our money back pretty quickly. I'm guessing that meant they didn't contest the refund with Airbnb. We've rented since then too, with none of that same creepiness being repeated. I definitely recommend using the company, but I suppose you just don't know what you're walking into until you actually arrive there. A few years ago now, me and a friend of mine got an Airbnb in Berlin for the weekend. A converted attic with 2 beds and some basic accommodations. The first night at around 4 a.m., I heard some footsteps walking up the final staircase, which led directly to the door of the attic. The next thing I knew, I saw the door slowly begin peeling open, as if someone was trying to sneak inside. I got this immediate gut punch feeling of terror, realizing I'd forgotten to lock the door. I just laid there, with my eyes glued to the doorway as it continued to slowly open. I called out, thinking it was a friend trying to mess with me or something. No response. The door stopped inching open. I called out again and again, but whoever was on the other side refused to answer. All of a sudden, the door swung wide open, slamming hard against the wall. I could see a shadow outline of a person, distorted by the darkness behind them and illuminated by the window slightly. I went into full fight-or-flight mode and sprang up onto the bed. I grabbed a nearby lamp to use as a weapon, and I swung it while running around the figure. After what felt like a few minutes, but was probably just a split second, I found myself with a clear path to the doorway, weaving around the figure into the subsequent staircase. I threw the lamp behind me at the intruder and flew down all 3 flights of stairs with so much energy. I was lucky not to fall and kill myself. I shook awake my friend immediately and told her we had to leave right now. I called the cops and said she had to come with me. A few minutes later, my other friends arrived. The cops arrived too. They told us the place was all clear, but we were idiots for leaving the door open and trashing the place. We had left the door open, but we'd never trashed it. That must have been the intruder. I never stayed in another dodgy place like that ever again. I wouldn't even if you paid me. It all started when my friend invited me to his house for the evening to stay over until the next morning. I had to be at his place around 9 p.m. so his parents could inform us of all the rules before they left for the evening. Unfortunately, I hadn't kept track of the time very well and arrived 15 minutes late because of this. Once we got to his place, we were all alone. His parents had seemingly already left. Later that evening, my friend decided to go downstairs to pee and get something to eat. After about 10 minutes though, he still hadn't returned yet. I went down to check what was going on when I saw my friend there, totally asleep on the sofa, with his parents. I should point out I'd never met his parents in person before this. They immediately told me that my friend, once he'd arrived downstairs, sat down on the sofa and collapsed from exhaustion. His parents took him upstairs to his bed to sleep. I was pretty tired as well, so I was just about to go to bed too. Right before I did so though, I received a notification message. The message said, "We're on the road, hope the house isn't a mess already." When I received this message, I immediately knew the parents that had been downstairs were not my friend's real parents. I had to come up with some sort of plan, but with the fear and stress, it was pretty hard to think in that moment. I called the fake parents and said there was a leak in the bathroom that wouldn't stop. They went upstairs, and once in the bathroom, I grabbed my friend and hid us in the garden shed. Once inside, I called my friend's parents and then the police, announcing what was going on. About 10 minutes later, the police and parents arrived, and my friend had finally woken up. I told him what was going on and opened the door for the police, telling them the story as well. About a week later, I heard back about the case. The people had not been found, but in the kitchen they found some very strong sleeping pills, as well as various pieces of rope and tape. Since that incident, I always make sure I meet my friends' parents before I ever try to sleep over at their houses.